Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive today? We're going to tackle wealth poverty and what it actually means to succeed in life. We'll be using Jordan Peterson's This Is How Money Works to help guide us along the way.
Hmm.
And let me tell you, he does not hold back when it comes to questioning some commonly held beliefs.
Absolutely. He really challenges us to think critically and to look beyond those surface level explanations for these complex issues.
Okay, so let's jump right in here with this first big idea.
Yeah.
Peterson argues that the distribution of wealth might be more like a force of nature than something we can fully control.
Yeah.
He uses this really cool analogy to illustrate this point.
Okay.
Have you ever played Monopoly?
Of course.
Think about how even when everyone starts out with the same amount of money, one person almost always ends up dominating the board.
Right. It's like it's inevitable.
Exactly.
Oh.
So what's this Monopoly analogy telling us about the real world?
Yeah.
Is Peterson saying that all wealth inequality is just a natural outcome, something we just have to accept?
Well, he's pointing to a pattern that shows up not just in economics, but in lots of different areas. It's called Price's Law. And basically it states that in any creative field, like music, literature, or even scientific discoveries, a small percentage of individuals tend to produce the majority of the output.
Wow.
The same uneven distribution, it pops up again and again, even in things like the number of hockey goals scored or the sizes of cities.
So you're saying it's not just about money.
Mm.
It's like this fundamental pattern we see everywhere.
Yeah, it really makes you rethink that whole idea of fairness, doesn't it?
It does.
I'm
Okay,
gonna-
but is there a risk in focusing too much on these patterns? Don't we also need to think about the systemic barriers that make it harder for some people to succeed?
Oh, absolutely. Those factors are definitely important to consider. But what Peterson is getting at is that even if we had a perfectly level playing field, we'd likely still see some level of inequality. It's a complex interplay of those individual differences and those systemic factors that are at work.
That's a really good point. Okay, so we've got this idea of wealth distribution being kind of like a natural phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
but then Peterson throws us a curveball with this story about the kulaks in 1920s Russia. These are like super successful farmers, incredibly productive. They were basically the ones keeping the entire nation fed.
Right.
So why were they targeted?
Yeah.
It seems completely backwards to punish the very people who are keeping everyone alive.
Well, this is where the dangers of ideologies start to show their face. Lenin's Bolsheviks saw the kulaks' success as this huge threat to their vision of a classless society. They basically demonized their achievements and blamed them for all the inequalities in society, calling them enemies of the people and exploiters.
And the consequences were devastating, right? Weren't they subjected to violence?
Yeah.
Stripped of everything they had, exiled?
Millions died as a result of these brutal policies.
Wow, this story is terrifying. But it makes you think about the language we use today. Are there times when we're too quick to slap labels on entire groups as oppressors without taking the time to really consider individual actions and all the complexities involved?
Yeah, that's a really crucial question to consider. Peterson warns us about the dangers of assigning collective guilt based on things like class race or any kind of group affiliation. You know, just like the kulaks were unfairly scapegoated.
Right.
We need to be careful about blaming entire groups without recognizing those individual nuances.
It's like finding that balance between holding individuals accountable for their actions while also recognizing that not everyone starts out with the same opportunities and circumstances.
It's a delicate balance.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about this idea of wealth distribution potentially being this natural phenomenon, and then we have this cautionary tale about the dangers of ideology. Now, Peterson brings us into his clinical practice with this question. Is poverty just a lack of money? He talks about a client who, despite receiving financial help, kept finding himself right back in that same destructive cycle.
Right. And here's where things get even more interesting. Peterson brings up individual traits like IQ and conscientiousness, which is basically how well people can plan and regulate their impulses.
He even mentions a client who struggled with holding down a simple volunteer job. Right.
Yeah.
So is he suggesting that some people just aren't cut out to handle even basic responsibilities? I mean, that seems kind of harsh, doesn't it?
He's not passing judgment, but he is acknowledging that there's a spectrum of human capabilities. What he's really getting at is that while societal factors absolutely play a role, individual differences also have an impact on a person's ability to navigate all the complexities of life.
Okay, so if poverty isn't just about money, then what does it actually mean to win in life?
That's exactly the question Peterson wants us to grapple with. He challenges us to really think about whether financial success is the only measure of a good life.
Right, because it's about so much more than just the size of your bank account. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore Peterson's ideas on what a more well-rounded definition of success might look like.
Stick with us.
All right, see you in part 2.
See, it's buried there.
Okay, so we're back. And we've kind of started to uncover this idea that the path to winning maybe isn't as straightforward as we thought, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about racking up a ton of cash. There's more to the story than that.
Absolutely. Peterson argues that a truly fulfilling life, it encompasses a lot more than just financial wealth.
Yeah, it really makes you think. Like if someone's got millions in the bank, but their health is terrible and their relationships are falling apart, can we really say they're winning?
It really highlights the limitations of defining success in such a narrow way. Peterson encourages us to think about it more holistically.
Oh, yeah.
Think about well-being, our connections with others, and our sense of purpose.
So it's not just about what you achieve, but it's about how you achieve it and the impact it has on you along the way.
Right.
But how do we actually go about defining success in a way that makes sense for us personally? I mean, Peterson doesn't exactly give us a step-by-step guide, does he?
No, not a one-size-fits-all formula, but he does encourage us to ask ourselves some really tough questions, like what are your strengths? What are you passionate about? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world? What would make you feel like you've really lived a meaningful life?
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about figuring out what truly matters to you, not just blindly following what society tells us is successful. It's like creating your own personalized version of winning.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that there isn't just one right path to a fulfilling life. For some people, it might be about building a successful business. For others, it could be raising a family or dedicating themselves to a cause they're passionate about.
It's not about comparing your journey to someone else's right. It's about finding what brings you genuine satisfaction and makes you feel like you're making a positive contribution.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance where you're using your talents and passions to make a difference in the world, and at the same time experiencing that deep sense of personal fulfillment.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a minute. We live in a world where money does matter. You need it to survive, to have choices, to take care of yourself and the people you love. How do we reconcile this need for financial security with this broader definition of success? Are we supposed to just ignore the practical realities of life?
It's not about ignoring them, but rather about being intentional about how we pursue them. It's about asking ourselves those tough questions, like what trade-offs am I willing to make? Am I willing to sacrifice my health, my relationships, or my integrity just to make more money?
That's such a crucial question. It's about finding that balance where you can pursue your goals and take care of your responsibilities without losing sight of what really matters in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. It's about aligning your actions with your values and finding a path that allows you to flourish financially and personally.
You know, this is making me think about those people who seem to have it all figured out. They've got amazing careers, loving families, they're in great shape, they're traveling the world. It's like they've cracked the code. Do you think those people really exist? Or is it all just a carefully constructed facade?
Well, I think it's important to remember that everyone struggles sometimes. No one leads a perfect life, no matter how it might look on social media or from the outside. Peterson talks a lot about the importance of accepting suffering as an inevitable part of the human experience.
That's a really good point. It's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others and feeling like we're not good enough.
Yeah.
But maybe it's more about focusing on our own personal growth and celebrating those little victories along the way.
Absolutely. True success isn't about reaching some final destination. It's an ongoing journey. It's about striving to become the best versions of ourselves while making a positive impact on the world around us.
I love that. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I just want to connect this back to everyone listening. If you're feeling stuck or lost, remember that you have the power to define what success means for you. Don't be afraid to question those conventional ideas and create a life that aligns with your own values and aspirations.
That's a powerful message. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll tackle those ethical implications of all of this. If wealth distribution does follow these natural patterns, like Peterson suggests, what does that mean for our responsibility to address poverty and inequality?
That's the big question, isn't it? Be sure to tune in for part 3 because things are going to get even more interesting. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive, and we've covered a lot of ground, but now we're getting to the part where things get a bit tricky. If we accept Peterson's argument that wealth distribution has these like natural, almost inevitable patterns, what does that mean for how we approach poverty and inequality?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? We're grappling with this tension between recognizing those potential natural patterns and our moral obligation to help those who are struggling.
It feels like a paradox on the one hand. If inequality is kind of just baked into the system, is it even worth trying to change things? But on the other hand, how can we just stand by and watch people suffer when we might have the resources to help?
It's not about giving up or imposing those quick fix solutions. It's about recognizing that there are no simple answers and thinking about this in a more nuanced way. Some people would say that if these patterns are natural, then trying to redistribute wealth is just pointless or maybe even harmful.
Right, like we're fighting against some fundamental law of nature, and maybe we should be focusing our efforts elsewhere.
Exactly. But then there are others who'd say that regardless of why poverty exists, we have a moral duty to alleviate suffering and to work towards a more just world.
So how do we even begin to navigate this? It feels like every solution has its drawbacks or unintended consequences. Like if we put all the emphasis on individual responsibility, are we just blaming people for circumstances they can't control? But then if we focus too much on providing support, are we creating a system where people become dependent and lose their motivation to reach their full potential?
It's a delicate balance. The answer probably lies somewhere in the middle. It's about supporting individual agency while also providing a safety net for those who need it. We've seen this debate play out over and over throughout history with different economic and political systems, all trying to grapple with these same fundamental questions.
So what does all this mean for us as individuals? If we're not politicians or billionaires, what can we actually do to make a difference?
Well, it starts with awareness and critical thinking.
Hmm.
We need to educate ourselves about these issues and challenge those oversimplified narratives that we often hear.
Right. It's about being wary of those black and white us versus them arguments, because it's always more complicated than that.
Exactly. And beyond staying informed, we can all make a difference through even those small acts of generosity and kindness.
I love that. You don't have to be a superhero to make a positive impact.
Not at all. Things like volunteering your time, supporting organizations that are doing good work in the world, or just treating people with respect and compassion. All of these things contribute to a more just and humane world.
It's like we're circling back to that idea of redefining what it means to win. It's not just about personal gain. It's about contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right.
And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive today. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope everyone listening is walking away with more questions than answers.
Because those questions are what keep us engaged, keep us thinking, keep us growing right. Thanks for joining us on this journey as we explore wealth, poverty, and the meaning of success. We'll leave you to ponder these complex issues, and hopefully you'll find your own unique way to make a positive difference in the world. Until next time, keep those minds curious.